Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report Daily podcast. I'm your host, Vago Muradian. Our podcast is brought to you by Bell. Since 1935, Bell has been redefining flight. Learn more about its pioneering spirit at bellflight.com. And it's our honor to be welcoming on the program Brigadier General John Rafferty, the director of the Long Range Precision Fires Cross-Functional Team, the organization at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, the home of cannon artillery, that is working one of the Army's 6 priority programs to deliver better long-range precision fires. Sir, thanks so much for joining us.
I'm thrilled to be here, Vago. Thank you for the opportunity.
Before we get started, our global coverage is sponsored by Leonardo DRS. Northrop Grumman sponsors our weekly cyber report and our broader cyber coverage. Fincantieri Marinette Marine sponsors our naval coverage. And of course, Bell sponsors this podcast. First time we're talking by podcast. Normally we do this by video, but obviously the coronavirus has changed that calculus. Talk to us a little bit about how you and your team are delivering at this trying time. At the end of the day, you have multiple challenges. One is to deliver on priority programs the nation and the Army needs. On the other hand, balancing the health and welfare of your forces, whether they're civilians, whether they're uniformed, whether they're contractors. And then, of course, there is not just the time component on all of this, but also a budgetary component, which you're trying to keep an eye on. Talk to us about how you're managing to make the magic happen, even if your forces are operating on a more distributed manner than they might ordinarily.
Going into this crisis is that we have been a distributed team, and as we've talked before, we have a base team here at Fort Sill of about 25 mix of military and civilian, but our real teammates are at Redstone Arsenal and Huntsville, Alabama, and Picatinny Arsenal in New Jersey, and the Detroit Arsenal in Detroit, Michigan. And then we have our industry partners that are scattered around in another, 10 or 12 locations. And so that's caused us to have to work, I'd say, the hardest working team in AFC to maintain a momentum across our lines of effort, across all our locations, and across all our organizations. And so I try to focus on what's the fundamental role of the cross-functional team, which is to lead the modernization effort. We aren't obviously bending metal. We aren't writing checks. We aren't working the acquisition strategy for these systems. But it's our job to bring it all together so we deliver capability at our important delivery milestones. And so I think here, and the impacts of COVID are different at every one of our locations. So fundamentally up front, we've been asked to look at what do we think the short-term impacts are, and what are, as General Murray put, what are the long poles in the tent that affect the critical path for some of these systems? What system or what events do we need to try to hold on to, and what measures can we put in place to make sure that we can execute those events with an abundance of caution, keeping people safe, and maintain the schedule. So about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, I had the opportunity, really the honor, to speak at a basic training graduation here at Fort Sill.
Oh, wow.
And it was done with social distancing principles in mind. So all the trainees, the soldiers were 6 feet apart. It was a very controlled environment. There was no shaking hands. There was no hugging. There was no backslapping. But it was a very professional and well done celebration of an accomplishment. It was broadcast out across the country so that friends and family could participate virtually. But what it was to me was a demonstration. Hey, the Army is a machine. We have got to keep going. The Army goes rolling along is more than a song, and so watching that provides really for me some inspiration and say we've got to figure out how to keep this modernization thing going too, and then talking to our industry partners who are in much the same situation as the Army in terms of the enterprise of making soldiers. They can't take a couple of months off from making critical parts or components or assembling, load, pack, and assemble of artillery rounds. They have to keep that going. And so they're doing their best to maintain or to provide a safe work environment and modify the conditions so that some of that production can continue. So that provides some inspiration to us to figure out how to do this. So some of the ways are enhanced collaborative meetings. And what I realized when I thought about it up front in the first week of this was A lot of times we say we're collaborating, and all I'm doing is really getting a briefing, and that's not good enough. And so we've just our team just kind of flipped our approach on its head, and let's start presenting ourselves problems to solve collaboratively over the distributed network. So that's one. But practically, to your point about how are we keeping it going, it's by identifying those critical path events, developmental test events that can still occur at places like White Sands and at Yuma, and even at Redstone Arsenal. That with an abundance of caution, we can protect the workforce and still maintain some momentum. So that's been our approach thus far, and I think we've identified a couple of key events in the next 60 days or so that we want to try to adjust and still execute. And one of the ways it has been inspired by the program manager for combat ammunition systems and the armament center at Picatinny, with Army Test and Evaluation Command personnel at Yuma, have figured out a way, what we're calling remotely managed testing, to do things like lot acceptance testing of artillery rounds, which is a routine practice in Army acquisition. As you get next lots of ammunition, there has to be a sort of a random sampling to make sure that that you're ready to accept that lot. And that's a great way that's a great method that we can apply to other developmental testing of propellant and projectiles, so that we can, like I say, draw some inspiration from the Army and making soldiers and our industry partners making critical components and keep this developmental testing enterprise going.
Why don't you give us kind of an overview on where you stand on all of the programs? You're looking at everything from missilery to very long range, to mid-range cannon artillery, or at least stretching the arms of cannon and rocket artillery as well, especially now that the United States is no longer in the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement. So that gives you a little bit more of a range component on the missilery side of things. And then also the 1,000-mile artillery that you're working on. And I know that there was a recent extended range cannon artillery test, but sort of give us a sense on where you are across the enterprise in all of the programs as you're trying to give the Army longer precision reach to be able to more effectively operate in areas that are anti-access area denial.
Yeah, sure. So I'm glad you finished with that anti-access area denial part, because as we've been working on systems, the Army's continuing to develop the multi-domain operations concept, and I know that the Joint Staff and that the Joint Staff is working very hard on a joint operating concept that involves all domains, and as those concepts are developed in parallel in some ways, that one informing the other in some ways too, that the fundamental problem remains that anti-access area denial problem at echelon. And so we see it at the tactical echelon and brigade combat teams and divisions. We see it at the operational echelon at sort of the corps and theater army area. And then we see it at the strategic echelon, which really challenges the joint force and access to the operating area. And so then from the Army's perspective, the central idea of MDO is long-range precision fires to deny the effect of that A2AD complex, which is the layered standoff. So then we look at starting at the strategic echelon, and it's interesting because often we get questions about isn't that another service's space to operate in, and isn't that another service's sort of sweet spot for delivering capability, and the way we see it now is that the enemy is setting those boundaries, and if the adversary A2AD complex is sophisticated and dense enough then it will challenge other domain superiority. And so long-range coastal defenses and other systems challenge maritime superiority in the Pacific, certainly. And integrated, sophisticated long-range air defenses challenge air superiority and dominance in the European theater, without question. And so that's where the surface-to-surface fires, in this case delivered by the Army, enable the other services. And so it isn't so much about a handoff of a spatial boundary. It's more of a handoff once that adversary capability is reduced. So then it really gets into quantities, right? So quantities of strategic weapons. How many do you need? We like to say just enough to win, but really it's just enough to enable the joint force at the strategic level. And so we know that General Thurgood's leadership on the long-range hypersonic weapon is paying big dividends with a very successful test event recently, and they're well on their way to delivering the prototype capability in 2023, and we're in full support of his team from a requirements perspective and from partnering with our teammates here at Fort Sill for the rest of the domains associated with the capability, the doctrine, the organization, the leader development, and the rest. The flip side of that then is if those exquisite long-range hypersonic weapon systems are going to be just enough to win, they're to take out some of those high-end target elements of the A2AD complex, then we have to have the lower cost, more affordable, high volume system to deliver against the area targets associated with that. So the lighter skinned and more mobile components of the A2AD complex. And so we've identified and laid out the target sets in the A2AD complex and are optimizing weapon systems against that. So to your question about the 1,000-mile cannon, our effort at the Strategic Long Range Cannon is a 2023 technology demonstration program. We are on track for that demonstration. We have industry partners that are on board with us for components of that. It is a government design for an integrated cannon system that will deliver this capability at these ranges, and it's on track and on budget. So we're making progress. Some ask, are we coordinated with the other services on this? And the answer is absolutely at the conceptual and doctrinal level. And I think that's really the important thing here. We're working the technology, much as I've described how we operate, in the Army, with no more handoffs from one community to the next, and then that even while the concept is being delivered or being developed, the technology experimentation is happening and the prototyping is happening, and one ought to be informing the other. And that's how we view this. These strategic fire systems, the technology experimentation and development that's going on is informing the operational concept for the Army and for the Joint Force. So that's kind of how we see where we are in the strategic systems. The transition now down to the operational level, which is the precision strike missile. And that's our Army tactical missile system replacement. So the ATACMS missile from the 1980s, upgraded several times and continues to serve us well, forward deployed in multiple theaters. But it has a range limitation of about 300 kilometers, and we know that we need to go a lot farther than that. And so the ATACMS replacement, a precision strike missile, or PrSM, is a similar cost, same lethality, 2 missiles per launch pod container instead of 1. So it doubles our onboard firepower while reducing the sustainment tail by half. And we've had a competitive program thus far, and that competition has transitioned to the next phase. And in the next phase of the enhanced tech maturation and risk reduction part of the program, one competitor has made it through the gates to get into that next phase. So right now we're focused on one industry partner for the path forward for the base missile, and that base missile will be delivered in an urgent material release to the Army in 2023.
And that's Lockheed Martin weapon.
That's correct. So they have another test event coming up later this month that we're working hard to support and make sure that we can execute that one. And then they are in the process of receiving the contract for the next phase of the operation, which is referred to as the enhanced tech maturation and risk reduction program. Very clever program designed by the program executive office and the program manager for, like I said, maintaining competition as long as we did, for being able to dial in on the requirements for urgent material release, so we get this capability in the field in 23, and then leaving the program with enough flexibility that we can compete the technology spirals afterwards. And so right now we are. I'm not saying there isn't a lot of work to do for the base missile. There is, but we are really turned our attention, and has dominated most of our collaborative sessions over the last week. We've turned our attention on our approach to Spiral 1, which is the seeker on the front end of the missile. And so this seeker will give the PRISM missile the ability to hit emitting targets. So those could be maritime targets. Those could be emitting IADs or radars. And so that is the real desired capability of the precision strike missile. But we got to get the base capability out first. Get those, as the engineers call it, get the bus out there, and then we can spiral in the capability. We have other technology spirals after that. How do we compete those so that, as we've learned in the base missile, we get the best work out of our competitors, and we get the best result at the best cost for our Army. And that is that's going to be the trick. But that's the commitment we've made as an Army, and under the leadership of the PEO and General Rash, he's going to ensure that we continue to do that. So we're really it's a really fantastic partnership between us, the Aviation and Missile Center, and the Program Executive Office for the base missile, and for this integration of the seeker onto Spiral 1.
Let me take you to the question of the extended range cannon artillery. You guys had a successful test recently. Walk us through and give us an update on that program, which is to outfit the Army's cannon artillery force with better projectiles, increased precision, increased range.
It was March 6th. It was a real milestone day for us, and it was a demonstration of the kind of the end-to-end capability. And so we had 65-kilometer target hits with the Excalibur projectile, and then we had greater than 65-kilometer range achieved with the XM1113, which is the high explosive rocket-assisted projectile. But the centerpiece, the star of the show, was the Prototype 0, and that is the first extended range cannon artillery system platform, and assembled at Picatinny Arsenal, delivered out to Yuma for the demonstration, and then more importantly, the technology readiness level assessment. At the end of this assessment, which we're trying to hold to a date early in the summer, but the end of that assessment signals the transition of that prototype capability from the lab to the program manager's office. And we'll have a board. Myself, the program manager, and the lab director will chair this transition board, and we'll make a conscious decision of the capability that's being transitioned, with an awareness of the work that still needs to be done on it. It is Prototype 0. So there are modifications that are going to have to be done so that prototypes 3, 4 through 18 are better than prototype 0. Where we get a lot of that feedback from our test partners at Army Test and Evaluation Command, but just as valuable, more valuable, really, is the feedback that we'll get from our soldiers during our soldier touch points that we have scheduled as part of this prototype development. So our highly qualified expert here, Mr. Jim Ackerman, one of our senior members of our team, that's his most important function here, is to organize and lead those soldier touch points so that soldier-informed development, that the capability we deliver is, reflects the important feedback of our cannoneers and artillery non-commissioned officers. But it was so we've demonstrated the projectile capability before, but it was on what we called a howitzer test bed. So it was the 58 caliber length gun tube on a surrogate howitzer. But this was the first prototype 0 that was delivered to Yuma and demonstrated. It helped us do the end-to-end system demonstration, because I always want to highlight that the extended range cannon artillery system, because it's the platform, it's the propellant, supercharged propellant that we're developing, it's the projectile artillery round, and it's the fuse, the course-correcting fuse, to make sure that we have the accuracy out of those extended ranges. And so now I just say that we're kind of, although this isn't really this definitely isn't a phase in the S&T playbook or a phase in the acquisition playbook, but I'd sort of refer to it as a period of optimization. We've demonstrated these baseline capabilities. Now it's a matter of getting the projectile exactly right, which in some cases involves the rotating band. So it's a longer gun tube. We're finding the rotating band has a lot of wear going down. That rotating band is a band of metal material that sticks out a little bit from the side of the artillery round. Its role is to provide a seal, and it seals into the lands and grooves of the cannon gun tube, and so that seal maintains the pressure behind the round, which gives it the sort of the uniform exiting muzzle velocity. So it's a really important component of the round. It's the last thing that touches the gun tube, and so we want to make sure that's optimized. In the propellant, it's really, I've learned an enormous amount about propulsion in this job, but it's a matter of optimizing the propellant formulation, and so that we get the muzzle velocity we want without too much pressure inside the gun tube, and without too much corrosion on the inside of the gun tube, and that it's a uniform exiting muzzle velocity. So our experience thus far is we've had a little bit more variation than we'd like, and so it's a matter of optimizing. And so what are we doing about all this optimization? Is building closer teams with our industry partners. So our S&T community gets to a certain point. Our industry partners are the ones that we know they're going to have to produce these things, because there's a scale of the Army that requires prime partners and others to deliver these capabilities in volume. And so having that collaboration earlier is how we're going to address the performance issues, and then the manufacturability issues at the other end of the prototyping.
And if I can ask you, we've got about 30 seconds left. Talk to us about the targeting layer. How much of the targeting layer you can use from the other services that exist? I know the Air Force has made quite an investment in sort of the global targeting infrastructure. I know that there's a little bit of a discussion where how the Army, the elements of that the Army would be able to use, and what you need on your own to be able to do targeting at the ranges you're talking about. Walk us through what the architecture will be on the targeting side of these increasingly long-range weapons.
We've done some significant experimentation with some systems developed that are being developed by Army G2 and 10 Cap, And we are partnered with the Assured Precision Navigation and Timing cross-functional team and the Future Vertical Lift cross-functional team. So our experimentation has involved devices known as ground stations or gateways that will allow greater access to all sources of intelligence, terrestrial, airborne, and space-based, with the Artificial Intelligence Task Force is working on our automated target recognition that will help us find the targets at the right level of fidelity. And then we're working on modifications to our fire's command and control systems that will allow us to generate calls for fire from targets that are detected and meet the target selection standards for execution. So all that's going on a parallel basis. And to be honest, that type of experimentation keeps all the cross-functional teams joined together. It forces us to have a combined arms approach to everything we're doing. And that's really where I'm finding that all of our experience in the operational force in our various, career fields is really comes together to get, that combined arms effect of the systems that we're working on.
Before we go, give us one piece on the Army Applications Lab and how you guys are supporting and how they're supporting your mission. Because at the end of the day, the second most material hungry organization in the entire United States Army after an armored division is artillery, and keeping that artillery supplied over range, at range, and in volume is quite a challenge. Talk to us a little bit about how the Army Applications Lab is helping you do that.
Yeah, thanks, Vago. It's been a great partnership. In the Army Applications Lab, located in Austin, Texas, at the Capitol Factory, has broken down barriers to small business in this opportunity to help us develop concepts for autonomous resupply for field artillery systems. And they selected a cohort of 6 companies, small business from around the country, each with a slightly different specialty in this area, gave them a user experience. We took them down to Fort Bliss. They spent about 3 or 4 days in the field with the field artillery battery and a forward support company, engaging soldiers and leaders in the conduct of their duties, seeing the problem firsthand. We didn't bound them with a big clunky requirement document. We really gave them the problem. And what we found as part of this cohort, which is about 14 weeks long, is they've come back to us with these fascinating ideas and concepts for how to tackle these problems. But more importantly, with real practical prototyping ideas that can be done in sprints over the next 8, 15, 24 months. That will help line up with some of our other delivery timelines. And so I think we've got a really exciting opportunity to take advantage of that innovative community out there that in the past may have not been able to do business with the Army or the Department of Defense. And so we're the first ones to explore this possibility with the Army Applications Lab. But their partnership and their leadership on this has been really phenomenal. I'm very excited about the future and look forward to updating you about it in the months ahead.
Thanks very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. You're welcome back on anytime, especially with updates as you move through some of these programs. Absolutely fascinating. And also, by the way, like the little tutorial on cannon artillery, anybody who likes big guns knows that it's a hell of a lot more complicated than I think that people think it is, especially to get those kind of ranges. I mean, 65 kilometers is an extraordinary accomplishment for a 155 millimeter gun. So we wish you all the best of luck. A lot of health for you and your team, and look forward to talking again.
Well, thanks, Vago. I appreciate your continued support for our efforts and helping us get the word out. And likewise, lay low.
We're going to do our best as we're hunkered down in DC Central here. Although I think, as you mentioned, it's a little bit easier to social distance at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, than it might be in Washington D.C. or New York City. So, thanks very much again, sir. And thanks for joining us this week. Please follow our daily interviews with top government, military, industry, and thought leaders at Defense and Aerospace Report, and subscribe to our weekly newsletter. Follow us on Twitter at DefAero Report. That's at DEFAERO Report. Like us on Facebook at Defense and Aerospace Report, and check us out on LinkedIn. Look for our weekly cyber report sponsored by Northrop Grumman. For more than 80 years, Bell has pushed past the boundaries of what's possible to drive aviation forward, going above and beyond flight. Bellflight.com. Thanks again to Bell for their generous sponsorship, and we'll see you again tomorrow.